All right. So last time we talked, I drew a box around this, and maybe that's why some of you might be confused about, well, why does she draw that box? Well, I drew that box because my paper is long and skinny. It's not wide. I'm doing portrait view, not landscape view. So I wanted to kind of get a clear idea of where the ed by paper was, so that's why I drew those lines. And the second thing I did was divide this collage into 8 boxes. And when I do that, that's a way for me to scale this collage up to the size of my paper. So then I went in and I divided this up into 8 boxes. And then remember, I put a piece of paper over each box. And then I only looked at the box that I was drawing. And that's a really good way of getting, only drawing what a little bit at a time and not getting overwhelmed with it. So I went and I did every single box and I kind of drew the contour lines. So that would be step 1. And that is drawing all your contour lines. So that is what's written in what you're posting today. Then the second thing I did was block in my values. So I went through and I'm still looking at each individual box here. But I'm going in and I'm adding a little value and I'm using my blending stumps and my fingers to just kind of spread it out. But I'm doing that pretty quickly, right? I'm just adding the value, but I'm not doing any detail work. This is nowhere near a finished drawing. This is like step 2, okay? Then the next step, and you guys, I don't expect you to get here today, but there's probably going to be a few of you that do. So I always like to kind of be a step ahead of everybody so that no one feels like they don't know what to do next. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of choose one of these boxes and I'm going to go in and start doing detail work. So how do I do detail work? I go in with my blending stumps and I start to smooth out my values. Now I'm really kind of like pushing that charcoal into the paper. And this is where we start to see different textures. So with the skin, I'm going for a kind of a smooth texture. And if you wanted to lift this up and say, well, I might as well finish that box, right? I don't need to stick really, really strongly to each quadrant that I've created anymore. I can go in and work on sections. So now I have a nice smooth skin. And then I want to look at the collage and say, well, is that darker than this? Well, yeah, it is. So next thing I'm going to do is go in with an eraser and I'm going to just kind of pull out some highlights with my eraser. And this is the subtractive part. And this is why charcoal looks really three-dimensional, is when we add these highlights. All of a sudden we get dimension. And this also blends it really nicely. Okay, so now I have a very smooth skin there. And then I'm going to do the same for the nose. So you want to just go from one thing to the next. And then I jump to a different nose here, right? This is Maya Angelou's nose, and this is Marilyn Monroe's nose. And they're completely different lighting, completely different skin tone. There's a lot of differences, so we want to try to make those differences really obvious. Actually, when we look at the photo, and this is all about lighting, right? Because Maya Angelou is African American and Marilyn Monroe is Caucasian. But when we look at the photo, their skin tone looks similar, and that's probably in the lighting of the shot. So it's up to you if you want to take some creative license and change that, you can, or you can just go with what you see on your page, on your collage. So because I'm already working on her skin tone, I'm going to do the whole face here. I'm going to go all the way down here. And this is just, I'm kind of like blending the charcoal into the paper and sort of like, in a sense, kind of grinding it into the paper. And now I'm going to pull out some highlights. And the highlights again are what make it look three-dimensional. Especially on things that have more dimension, like the nose and the cheekbones and the nostrils, like the tip of the nostril. And again, it all just depends on the lighting of the photo. Some lighting on photos are high contrast, some lighting on photos are low contrast. Okay, so that's sort of the soft skin that we want to see. So let's work on something that might have a lot more texture to it, that might be kind of fun, like the fur on Virginia Woolf's jacket. So I'm going to go in, and as I'm texturizing it, I'm going to actually create lines. So you can see I'm using my blending stump to kind of drag it through to create sort of a furry, fuzzy texture. And I don't need to blend it all soft, right? Because it doesn't all look soft. It looks a little bit grainy. Then I'm going to go in, and I could use a different type of eraser. Like if I use this number 2 eraser, it's going to create more of a line than if I use my big chunky eraser. And I'm looking at my reference. I'm also improvising a little bit because these are tiny little furry lines, so that might be kind of hard to do. And then I'm going to go back in and I'm going to add more sharp lines with my charcoal. And you could pay attention to where the fur looks a little darker. So, you know, I want you to kind of get used to working on something for a while. This is not a drawing that should take you an hour. This is a drawing that should take you probably 3-4 hours in chunks of time. And that's really how artists work, right? You can throw in a little white charcoal in there too. You kind of have to just get used to working on something for a long time. Visual arts takes time. Any art form takes time. Okay, so there's maybe on another day I'll show you like maybe the fur on the monkey or the texture in her sweater, or maybe how to get her Billie Eilish's long hair, stuff like that. Those are the textures that I'm talking about. And then you're also refining things. Like this hand is really kind of messy looking. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to start to really look at the hand and the fingers and do a lot of blending and erasing to kind of refine it. Okay, so just work on one thing at a time and don't try not to get overwhelmed with the whole thing. Just one section at a time. All right, let me stop my